Hey, welcome for this afternoon session, 3:45. The topic is touching history, theory and practice in oral history interviews. And as someone who is trained as a librarian, as an archivist, and as a historian / social scientist, I think that this is one of the great important pieces that often gets missed, is that as long as we have documents and facts, we only have part of what happened, because those facts are wrapped in stories. And so how you get the stories is the important aspect that is going to be addressed today. Our first speaker is Angelita Reyes, and she is Professor Emerita in the School of Social Transformation at Arizona State University. And her work, Mothering Across Cultures, Post-Colonial Representations, engages historical inquiry and interdisciplinary humanities to analyze mothering as a framework for Black women's intellectual and cultural traditions in Africa and the African diaspora. She has also edited books and articles on race, class, gender, and gender for social justice. Her articles have appeared in numerous multidisciplinary publications, and she holds a master's degree in international education from New York University and a PhD in comparative literature and anthropology from the University of Iowa. And her topic is touching history, spaces between theory and oral history practices. So welcome, Angelita.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. I would like to share with you the fact that it was about 40-something years ago since the last time I was here at Green Acre. My daughter is 44, so she was 2 years old when she came with me. And so this is a kind of homecoming for me. And I can assure you, friends, this place has changed since 40 years ago. So that's a historical fact. So thank you. I want to thank the Corinne True Center for Baha'i History for presenting this, sponsoring it, and for my being a part of all this. Thank you. So today, touching history. First, in this presentation, I want to talk about oral history through analysis, inquiry, and practice. Then I want to go into this idea of pilgrim notes. You all know what pilgrim notes are, but let's see if we can do a little something else with those pilgrim notes. And we've been talking about pilgrim notes today, this morning, with Holly Hansen. We're talking about memory telling, storytelling. So this is all coming together in a very nice way. First of all, touching history. This highlights the relational connections to history through intangible experiences, such as oral testimony, cultural practices, and embodied knowledge, rather than through the physical artifacts that often represent abstract history. And very quickly, again, this is very touching for me because, as I said, it was 40-something years ago that I had the experience of going to the room in the inn where Abdu'l-Bahar was. This is not just the physical touching. We don't experience that. But it's the idea that he was there, the intangible, the sacred, the spiritual, the emotional touching history. So in this context of oral history, touching history means that experience of the past, through hearing these memories and engaging with spaces, not just places, but spaces where people have been and where their lives have been. And so those are those historical moments. So we often have these firsthand experiences to bearing witness to different types of history. Now, many historians look at the primary sources and the secondary sources of stories, and so do oral historians. Oral history is both a field of study and a method for gathering, preserving, and interpreting the voices and memories of people, communities, and participants in past events. Oral history is really the oldest form of historical inquiry, rooted in the oral traditions of cultures across the globe and predating even the written word. And we'll come back to this idea of the written word, which Western culture puts a premium on, the written word as opposed to the spoken word. So, oral history is also a modern profession. We're owing its recent emphasis on preservation to technologies ranging from wax cylinders, wire recorders, tapes from the past, and now technology is helping us to even promote oral history in new ways. Now, oral history, for those of you who are historians here, you know oral history was once considered the stepchild, right? The stepchild of academic or text-based history. However, oral history has now achieved a new level of relevance, acceptance, validity, and respectability. Rather than seeking solely objective facts, historians analyze oral narratives for structure, meaning, and human experience. Oral history as a practice encompasses both the interviewing process and the output that emerges from it. To gather and preserve meaningful information about the past, oral historians might record interviews that focus on the narrator's life histories or conduct topical interviews in which narrators are selected for their knowledge of a particular historical subject or event. So there are many different approaches to collecting, preserving, archiving oral history. The value of oral history lies largely in its ability to place people's experiences within a broader social and historical context, and to contextualize social and historical events through the ways people lived them. The interview is one kind of process, becomes a record for documenting past events, individual or collective experiences. So now we can understand, just in a nutshell, that oral history is a literary genre in its own right. And giving another example, during the 1960s and the 1970s, we had the civil rights movement here in the United States. It was oral history that gave voice to marginalized people, marginalized groups in the American society. Now, after all of those years, we're touching history when we meet people, including Baha'is, who were a part of the dynamic civil rights movement in the 60s and the 70s. So academics may dismiss oral accounts as unreliable, subjective, or prone to the distortions of human memory. And that can happen in oral history. We don't deny that. Mainstream historians may privilege written, official, or the archives as the only path to quote unquote objectivity. But we have what Toni Morrison calls the truth and the fact. And so how do we separate those two? And this is something we can discuss later, perhaps in the comment section. The core elements of an oral history project of inquiry. A true oral history follows a structured methodology to ensure the resulting data is preserved for future generations. We have preparation. The interviewer conducts the background research and drafts a flexible list of questions. Recorded dialogue. How do you record that dialogue? The interview is actively recorded, and of course nowadays we've moved from that old-fashioned taping and cylinder, and we're going into video recording. We have the automatic transcript. We have cell phone. So we have all of these basic technologies that can help us with our oral histories. Informed consent. The interview or the narrator provides a clear, informed consent to be recorded. And this is very important, especially those of us in academia, you're going out, you're representing the university, they have a whole list, a whole code for documenting, for recording what you have done. And they take it very seriously. And why is this? Because so many times, friends, it has been exploited. In the past, it has been exploited. So it's very important that informed written consent. Archiving. So what do? After you've collected this dynamic recording, videotape, you've listened. The recording is transcribed, indexed, and placed into an archive or library or online. So even the definition of archive has expanded now. So here, I want to give you a brief summary of the work that I have been doing with oral histories, historic preservation. First, we have this idea of oral history of a video project in rural Southern Virginia. And we're all familiar with Virginia. It's a great state. It was the wealthiest colony during colonization and so on and so forth. But that was the northern Virginia. Southern Virginia is different. I see my friend Bill shaking his head. Well, Bill, that's where my work is, rural and southern. So my great-grandfather was enslaved. He was born in 1854, so by the time of 1863, he was still a child, basically, young when, emancipation. And he lived in Southern Virginia, and we have a slave cabin that we are trying to rehabilitate, and we want to make a center, an education center in this area of Southern Virginia. So we were very fortunate a year ago, to get $250,000 from the federal government to preserve this site. From the federal government, well, not exactly the same, but from the federal government at present, the money was rescinded. So we have nothing. At the same time, we still have the capacity for programming. Over the years, people kept telling us, you have to do oral histories of this area. So since we could no longer do the physical historic preservation of the building, we turned to programming and oral histories, which we were able to get some small grants for. So this project becomes the idea in the 21st century, literacy is more than reading a newspaper or a book. And here we have the image of a woman, African-American woman. This was taken in about 1932. She's 82 years old, and she was born into slavery, and she's learning to read. This is an image from the Library of Congress. So I'm juxtaposing this image, all of that idea of literacy, with literacy in the 21st century. Artificial intelligence, computer literacy, financial literacy, cultural literacy. So our organization, nonprofit, Literacy Interactives, brings all of this together. Historic preservation, new kinds of literacy. So why do we call it Literacy Interactives? Because we know that literacy, that word, resonates with people all over the world. literacy. There are very few people who are against it, or maybe there are some people who do not want other people to have the empowerment of literacy. Before emancipation, during enslavement, as many of you may know, enslaved people were not allowed to read and write. Why? Because it's empowerment. It would enable them for freedom. Literacy was highly forbidden. So after the Civil War, we have the formation of the Freedmen's Bureau, and formerly enslaved people were going to the Bureau to learn how to read and write. So when I founded this organization, I wanted this memory, this storytelling about my great-grandfather who learned how to read and write at the Freedmen's Bureau. So this organization, this idea of literacy, the story of literacy, is paying homage not only to him, but to all those people of that, what we call the first generation of African Americans, the first generation to move into literacy. So we have this background of the Parker Sycamore Historic Site, the one whose funding was taken away, whisked away, but that's okay. And then we have the founding of the organization and what literacy represents in the 21st century. We're no longer necessarily teaching adults to read and write, but we are focusing on literacy in the 21st century. So, moving on to the project that I'm working on, Preserving Our Voices. This was a project that we wanted to interview elders in this area of Virginia about their lives. Video interview, we had 6 people. Because of time, there will be more people that we're going to interview. And this became the idea of the elders. When the elders pass away, their libraries can be gone because we don't have their voices. But we want to claim those voices. We emphasize the importance of oral histories. We also emphasize the idea of technology, that we're not just recording them, but we are filming them. And these videos are online now. Let's quickly move to pilgrim notes. We're all familiar with what the Guardian has said about pilgrim notes. They're hearsay and cannot claim the authority and binding power of the sacred text. In a letter written on behalf of the Guardian in 1954. On the other hand, each pilgrim brings back information and suggestions of the most precious character. And it is the privilege of all the friends to share in the spiritual results of these visits. So, how are Baha'i pilgrim notes a genre of oral history when examined through the frameworks of oral history analysis, inquiry, and practice? At this time, how many more minutes do I have, please? Okay. At this time, I want to share with you how I touched history when I went to East Africa in 1974 to Uganda, specifically to Uganda. And there, we know Uganda was the first place in Africa to be opened up in 1931. And so I went to Uganda, not as a Baha'i. I became a Baha'i in Uganda, became a pioneer there, and I stayed there for almost 4 years. But in the 70s, there was this idea of just being excited about going to Africa, because now in the 70s, the 60s saw independence, right? All of the countries are becoming independent, all the major countries. So now the decade of the 70s is like an aftermath. We have all of these agencies from the United States, Switzerland, France, they're going to Africa, and there was just this enthusiasm. We're going to change the world. We're, just reject colonialism, imperialism, we're the one. There was just this energy. That's how I went to East Africa. So there, I met Baha'is. I met the Olinga family. I met George and Farouk. I met, Isabel Sabri. Now, how I met Isabel Sabri, by the time I got to East Africa, I should specifically say to Uganda, Mrs. Sabri was in Nairobi, in Kenya, with Hassan. And so George and Farouk, we became friends, or George and Farouk Olinga, some of you may not know them, but the Olingas, George and Farouk, we were same age group and all of this. We were teachers, and we would have holiday, and we would go to Nairobi. So on this particular holiday, I stayed with the Sabris. And Isabel was talking about the Baha'i faith, and of course I knew about the faith by this time from George and Farouk. She says, well, are you a Baha'i? I said, of course I'm a Baha'i. And she says, oh! And so she says, I do know that. And I think I didn't know it either, but I just blurted that out. And so she says, well, you're not going to sign here in Nairobi, but go back home to Kampala, because that's my home, and you will sign and become a pioneer. Now, at that time, friends, I didn't know that Isabel had been in Haifa with Shogi Effendi. They've been all over the world. Isabel traveled with Hassan, and then eventually they settled in Kampala. Well, first in Kampala and then in Nairobi. So some time ago, my friend Farouk, about 2021, she passed. And I was just so crestfallen because Uganda had meant so much to me. And in honor of Farouk, I wanted to write about that experience of touching history. And I began to do the research, and I found out all these pilgrim notes that Isabel has written, and they're in the Baha'i Library. There's even something I just recently found out that someone has put on YouTube, a recording of Isabel talking about her experiences meeting Shogi Effendi. So that her pilgrim notes now have been recorded. Remember, I talked about how oral history is oral, is written down, transcribed, and her pilgrim notes have gone through all of that. And now we can hear her voice. We can hear her voice. And that becomes very exciting. So what I would like to do is just to see if I can just share with you just a paragraph of her pilgrim note. She has a lot. And if you just Google her name, you will see this. And this is April 19, 1957. This is her note. A question was asked concerning the future of the faith in Africa. Yes, certainly the destiny of the Black and brown races is very great. The brown, Black, and yellow races constitute the majority of the people of the world. One day, perhaps, the majority of the believers will be from the brown, Black, and yellow races, and the white race will be in the minority in the faith. This is right. This is Shogi Effendi responding from her notes. A question was asked about music in the temples. No tape recordings are to be used for musical instruments. This is to be only the sound of human voice, not the sound of a machine. Now, does that sound familiar from what we heard this morning? So let's talk about that later. This is from a pilgrim note. Isabel Sabri. Okay. So you see these nuances with memory telling. And by the way, Isabel does preface all of her pilgrim notes with the comment, or with the statement that I showed you earlier about pilgrim notes being hearsay. She clearly states that in all of her memories and her writing all of this down. So I want to conclude. Isabel has spent her bountiful evenings at the dinner table talks with Shogi Effendi as a pilgrim and his guest in the Holy Land many years before I was a guest in her Nairobi home. And by the way, in one of the notes, Isabel says all of the pilgrims at that time were guests of Shogi Effendi. Completely, totally. Baha'is now make the pilgrimage, the sanctioned journey to Baha'i religious sites in the Holy Land, as honored guests at the invitation of the International Governing Council of the Baha'i Faith. Regardless of the elapsed time, reading Isabel's pilgrim notes helped me recall remarkable events in East Africa involving extraordinary pioneers who had been part of the historical 10-year crusade. And friends, by the time I got to Uganda in '74, there were still people who were alive who had opened up the faith in 1951, 52, 53, and so on. Mr. Banani, Auntie Claire, and of course, Isabel. Claire Goond, I don't know if you know her name, she was there for years in East Africa, and she had a nursery, and everyone called her Auntie Claire. Of course, Enoch Linga, the Continental Board, Isabel served on that, and the NSA of Central and East Africa. Moreover, it's one kind of experience to read the effulgent words of Shogi Effendi throughout the Baha'i writings, but it's another to hear them recounted by someone who actually heard the cadence of his voice and who was in his presence when he conversed with groups of Baha'i pilgrims at the Baha'i Pilgrim House in Haifa, or shared his joy about the exciting expansion of the faith throughout Africa. Well, Isabel recounted the daily activities of pilgrimage and the nightly dinners of Shogi Effendi and other Western pilgrims. She also acknowledged the limitations of the notes and their place in Baha'i literature and history. She made it very clear that her notes were from memory. On the other hand, we have this understanding of pilgrim notes as a form of memory telling, as a form of oral history. We can appreciate the unique context of Isabel Soper's notes as the pilgrim talks, we can appreciate these notes as memory telling and oral history. We can appreciate the unique context of Isabel Soper's notes as the pilgrim talks among early Baha'i pilgrims and pioneers, as well as within the discipline of oral history for later generations. Thank you. Image of the Baha'i House of Worship, Hikaya Hill, Kampala, Uganda. We used to go there every Sunday. It was finished, the building was finished in 1961. Thank you.
Thank you, Angelita. I love what